Hello students, welcome to your channel Zebish English Classes. I hope you all are keeping well. And in today's video lecture, I have picked up this book Echoes, which is from ISC board for the students of 11th as well as 12th standard. And the story that I have picked up today is the ninth one, that is The Sound Machine, which has been written by Roald Dahl, and I have already done the summary of this story in another video. So if you want to go through the summary of this story, you can go through that particular video. Here in this video lecture, I will be doing line by line explanation of this story. But before I go ahead with the line by line explanation of this story, let me tell you one thing that I will be doing it in two parts. So this is the first part of line by line explanation of this story. And secondly, let me also discuss a bit with you before I start with the story that this story is all about the sound machine, and there is a character named Klosner, and Klosner is a protagonist in the story. So who is a protagonist? Protagonist is the most important character or the lead character in a plot around whom the entire story revolves and who plays a vital role. So here in this story, Klosner is a protagonist, and he is that person who is very much passionate about creating such a machine which should be able to catch all such sounds that are in general not audible to the human ears. So he is passionate about sounds, and consequently he wants to prepare such a machine. But then slowly and gradually, his passion begins to change into an obsession. An obsession is something which is negative. Negative in the sense that till you are passionate, you try your best to achieve your goals with all the possible endeavors and diligence. But then, as soon as your passion changes into an obsession, then you try to chase your goal even with all the negative ways. And it is because you tend to lose your sense and you fail to understand and distinguish between the right and the wrong. So here we get to see about this character of Klosner, that how he goes kind of crazy while trying his best to prepare such a sound machine which should be able to catch all sorts of sounds, even that human ears cannot hear in general. And then he wants human ears to be able to hear even such sounds. So one more thing which is very important is the normal range of the frequency which is audible to the normal human ear, and it is from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. This is the range of that normal hearing ability of a human being's ear. So we have to understand that all the sounds that are below 20 hertz, they are low pitched sounds and they are qualified as infrasounds. And all such sounds that go beyond 20,000 hertz, they are high pitched sounds and they are qualified as ultrasounds. So we as human beings can neither hear those infrasounds or nor those ultrasounds. So this is the attempt of Klosner in this story to prepare such a device that can even enable the human ears to hear all those infrasounds as well as ultrasounds. So let's get started with the story and see what happens and how he tries to do all this. It was a warm summer evening, and Klosner walked quickly through the front gate and around the side of the house and into the garden. At the back, he went on down the garden until he came to a wooden shed, and he unlocked the door, went inside, and closed the door behind him. So, the writer has first of all explained this to us that it was a summer season going on and it was an evening time. So, due to the summer season was kind of warm, and Klosner was taking a walk, through the front gate of his house, and he was going towards his garden area in which there was a wooden shed. So, he had gone to that wooden shed and he went inside that shed, and then he closed the door from inside. Now, something mysterious will surely happen in that wooden shed. And let us see what happens. The interior of the shed was an unpainted room. Against one wall on the left, there was a long wooden workbench, and on it, among a littering of wires and batteries and small sharp tools, there stood a black box about 3 feet long, the shape of a child's coffin. So when we see the interior part of that shed, then there was an unpainted, no, it was an unpainted room. There was no painting inside, and against one wall on the left side, we get to see that there was a wooden workbench lying. So it was a wooden workbench. It means it was made of wood, and workbench is that bench where the things may be lying or somebody may be using it to work upon. So here we get to see that there was a littering of wires. Littering is basically garbage, but here it has been used for the wires just because the wires were lying there on that workbench in a very messy way, in a very disorganized manner, and that's why it has been said that they were lying, like litters. So there was a littering of wires, and some batteries were lying too. Then there were some small sharp tools. So all these equipments were lying in which are reflecting that some kind of a device is to be made over here. And then there was that important part of that device was lying too. And there stood a black box. So it was a black box, and it was about 3 feet long. So as to understand the picture of that black box more clearly, you can compare it with the coffin of a child. Coffin is that box in which a dead body is placed. So you can correlate with the picture of a coffin which is meant for a child. It must be small in size, so that black box was as small as a coffin which is meant for a child. Klausner moved across the room to the box. The top of the box was open, and he bent down and began to poke and peer inside it among a mass of different colored wires and silver tubes. So Klausner moved across that room, to that box. So since in that wooden shed itself, that wooden shed is being referred to as the room, and in that room on that workbench there was that box. So Klausner reached to that box, and then he saw that the top of the box was open, so he just bent down and he began to poke. Now, what is poking? Poking is like in this pouch. I'm trying to search something with the help of this pen. So if I'm trying to search something, or I'm trying to do something with the help of an object, or with the help of some stick or some pen over here, so when we do something like this, it is called poking. So he was just doing something with the help of his fingers in that black box, and he was also peering into it. That means he was looking inside, he was trying to find out, he was examining that. There was a collection of different colored wires and silver tubes, and he was doing something with all those stuffs. He picked up a piece of paper that lay beside the box, studied it carefully, put it down, peered inside the box, and started running his fingers along the wires, tugging gently at them to test the connections, glancing back at the paper, then into the box, then at the paper again, checking each wire. He did this for perhaps an hour. Okay, so what he was trying to do, like he was okay, so he had also prepared a layout for that device on a piece of paper, and therefore he was checking the design on that piece of paper again and again. And for that purpose, he had to study the paper very carefully, and then he would get back to his machine again and would start doing something with the help of his fingers all over again. So this is how he was just doing it, and had been continuously doing for at least for around an hour, you can say. And this is how he was like tugging the wires gently. Tugging is like dragging towards himself, and he was trying to test the connections. Like he was doing these things with different wires, as if he was just trying to check whether which wire could turn out to be working for getting them into a kind of a connectivity. So he was preparing that device with the help of that layout which he had prepared beforehand on a piece of paper. And for that purpose, he was going through that piece of paper intermittently, and then would get back to his machine to work upon that. So this is how he would just tug the wire, and then would try to connect one wire with another one, and would find out whether it was working or not. So this is how he was just trying to check the connection. Then he put a hand around to the front of the box where there were three dials, and he began to twiddle them, watching at the same time the movement of the mechanism inside the box. So then he put a hand around to the front of the box. Then he took his hand to the front of the box, and there were three dials. So, as to understand the picture of the tiles very clearly, you can correlate it with the picture of a radio that used to be there. So, you must have seen in the radios, there used to be dials and we could twiddle them. Twiddle is like twist them. So, there were three dials on that black box, and he was twisting those dials, watching at the same time. So, while see, when we used to twist the dials of the radio, we used to be very alert so as to see whether the channel was changing or not, whether some. In the same manner, he was trying to see whether there was some kind of a change or not, whether anything was happening or not. So he was making very sure to see what was happening while twisting the dials. And all the while, he kept speaking softly to himself. Now, this gesture of Klausner is showing that he was very much preoccupied with that task which he had taken up. Nodding his head, smiling sometimes, his hands always moving. Like generally, you see somebody, and especially it happens with children when they are very much busy or engaged with some activity, then it happens with them that they keep on nodding their head, they keep on smiling to themselves only, and then their hands will move and their fingers will move, like they will do that activity with all their, parts of the body engaged with it. So here we get to see Klausner doing this activity in the same manner. Nodding is like shaking his head, smiling when he finds his job, doing very well. So his hands always moving, and then fingers were moving swiftly, quickly. Deftly means skillfully, as if he was quite expert in doing that piece of work. He was doing all that inside the box, and his mouth twisting into curious shapes. So while doing that piece of work, if we get to see the expression on his face, the expression on face is called countenance, in one word, countenance. So the countenance or the expression on his face was like twisting one or contorting one. He was actually contorting his face, and it was simply because he was very much occupied with that piece of work. And he would also react intermittently, that means after short intervals. He would react when he thinks that something is actually going on very well and he's able to achieve his goal and he's very near that achievement. He shows his gesture of joy, and his expressions change in the same way when he finds he's not able to do things and things are getting difficult for him, and he is away from his dream as yet, then he would show that kind of a gesture, and the expressions would be that way on his face. So while doing that, he would say yes, yes, it's going on, and then he would suddenly change his words when he finds that he was not able to do it properly anymore. So he would continuously speak to himself. And this gesture of speaking to oneself while doing an activity with so much of engagement, this shows that you are lost in that activity and you are no more in your senses and no more aware of what is happening in your surrounding. You are just into that activity, and that's all. So this gesture of Klausner is manifesting this only, that he was completely lost with that piece of task that he had taken up for himself, and that he was simply into that completely and just wanted to come out only victorious. So while doing that, he was saying, and now this one, yes, yes, oh, but this is right. So this is how he was asking questions to himself, then was answering himself, and then he said, is it? Where's my diagram? So while doing that, he was not sure whether he was going in the right direction or not. So he wanted to seek assistance from that diagram that he had prepared beforehand, and that's why he started looking for that piece of paper to go through that diagram once again and ensure that he was working in the right direction upon that black box. So we go ahead to another paragraph on page number 100. Yes, of course. Yes, yes, that's right. And now, good, good. Yes, yes, yes. His concentration was intense, his movements were quick. There was an air of urgency about the way he worked, of breathlessness, of a strong, suppressed excitement. So he was saying, yes, of course, yes, yes, I'm right, that's right, and good. So it is showing that he was very much excited at that point of time, and also that he found himself going in the right direction. His concentration was intense, that means it was of extreme level, and such was his movements. Just because he was very excited, his movements were very quick too. And then there was an air of urgency. Air means attitude. So there was an attitude of urgency, as if he was doing it, uh, you know, as if in a hurry, and he had to complete that task within some allotted period of time. He was doing that in such a way. And that's why, the way he was working, there was kind of breathlessness, and then there was an excitement which he was trying to suppress over and over again so that he could concentrate upon his work without reflecting it. Suddenly he heard footsteps on the gravel path outside, and he straightened and turned swiftly as the door opened and a tall man came in. It was Scott. It was only Scott, the doctor. So abruptly, which means suddenly, it happened that he got to hear the footsteps of somebody walking on the gravel, that means small stones. So, stony path outside. And he just got up from that piece of work which he was occupied with. So, as he just straightened himself and turned quickly uh, to see that the door had opened. Somebody had opened the door, right? So somebody opened the door, and as soon as the door was opened, a tall man came in, and that tall man was none other than Scott, that doctor, who was a friend of Klosner. Well, 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 the doctor said. So this is where you hide yourself in the evening. So the doctor, being a friend of Klosner, said it in a jesting way that, oh, so this is the place where you conceal yourself, you hide yourself. Hello, Scott, Klosner said. I happened to be passing. The doctor told him, so I dropped in to see how you were. There was no one in the house, so I came on down here. How has that throat of yours been behaving? Okay. It means Klosner's throat wasn't going well, due to which he had made a visit to the doctor, and the doctor had rendered him some treatment. So today the doctor was passing from there, and so he thought of reaching to his friend and asking him whether the medicines had worked properly or not, and whether his throat had gone well or not. So he just reached there and said, Ki, I was just passing from there, and that's why I thought that I should make a visit to your place and find out if you're there and if you're well now. So he is also telling him and giving the excuse how he had reached that wooden shed in the garden, that he had found nobody in the house, and for that reason he moved up to that wooden shed. So he asked him whether his throat was then behaving well. And to that question, Klosner replied that it's all right, it's fine. That means his throat had then started behaving well, and it was much better. Now I am here, I might as well have a look at it. So the doctor offered to Klosner that he would like to have a look at his throat just because he had reached there. Please don't trouble, I'm quite cured, I'm fine. So to that, Klosner replied that Klosner was not interested in that, and he did not want the doctor to do any sort of a checkup, since he thought that he was completely okay by that time, and he did not want the doctor to take any kind of a trouble. And he also, assured this to the doctor that he was much, much better by that time. And why was he doing all this? We all know it very well, that just because, it is like this. you are studying for your examination tomorrow, and you haven't studied throughout the year, and now you have to prepare everything as soon as possible just because you have no time left and tomorrow itself is your examination. So you're just trying to do it from the evening time itself, and then in the evening it happens that some guests who weren't invited at all, but they make a visit all of a sudden to your place, and then you're not able to attend them and entertain them, but you simply want a spare time and want to leave them all alone, or want them to leave from there so that you can again concentrate on your studies. Here also it happens with Klosner that Klosner was not at all in a mood to entertain his friend or to ask him to sit down, since he did not want him to realize that he was doing something like that, and he wanted to be left all alone so that he could simply concentrate on that particular project. So the doctor began to feel the tension in the room, but the doctor could sense something mysterious going on there, and that there was a kind of a tension in the room. He looked at the black box on the bench, and the doctor got to see that black box which was on the bench, and then he also looked at the man. He was kind of giving that expression on his face that the doctor had sensed something that was kind of fishy, and it was going on in that room. You have got a hat on, he said. Then the doctor commented that your hat is still on your head. Oh, have I? Klosner reached up, removed the hat, and put it on the bench. Then Klosner realized, oh, really? I forgot to take it off. Then Klosner reached up to his hat, and then he took it off and then put it on the bench. The doctor came up closer and bent down to look into the box. And as the doctor could not control himself from doing this, he actually went closer to that box and bent down as well to have a glance into that box and see what was it. So, what's this? He said, making a radio. So, as I had already told you that so as to understand a very clear picture of that black box, you could correlate it with the picture of a kind of a radio, just because a radio has also got some dials, and then when you twiddle them or twist them, then you get to see how the channels change. In the same manner, here this black box has got some dials, three dials in front, and then as Klosner used to twist those dials, he used to be very alert and vigilant so as to see what kind of a mechanism would start working. So he said, are you making a radio? No, just fooling around. That means I'm just doing it for the sake of fun, and I'm not doing anything seriously. It has got rather complicated looking innards. Okay. So this was the comment of the doctor made upon that black box. He said that it seems to be a kind of a complicated looking innards. So innards are entrails, or you can say they are internal organs or intestines in a human being's body or in an animal's body. So here it seems to be like innards, or innards are also called entrails, or you can say the mechanism of a device here in this case, because innards also refer to the mechanism that a particular device has got. So here it is referring to that only, and the doctor is saying this. Yes, Klosner seemed tense and distracted. So Klosner simply agreed to that and said that yes. However, from the entire countenance, as I told you, countenance is the facial expression. From that, the doctor could easily sense that Klosner was distracted. That means he was not able to pay attention to the conversation, and also he looked kind of tense. What is it? The doctor asked. It's a rather frightening looking thing, isn't it? So the doctor said, what is it actually? Please tell, because it seems to be something very frightening or scary. It is just an idea. So see, now Klosner was kind of obliged to tell him the fact, because the doctor was unable to restrict himself from asking questions to Klosner. However, the doctor could easily see that Klosner was not much interested in answering to the questions that were being put forth by the doctor. Still, the doctor continued to ask the questions, and then Klosner became kind of compelled, to answer to his friend. So he began to answer now, truly, and he said it is just an idea. Yes, okay. It has to do with sound, that's all. So it is just an idea that arrived in my mind, and then I decided to execute it in the form of a machine, and it has everything to do with the sounds. Good heavens, man, don't you get enough of that sort of thing all day in your work? So when doctor got to know that, he said, oh my God, that is something great. But then tell me, don't you get to hear enough sounds around yourself while working that you need a sound machine as well to hear even the spare sounds? I like sound. So this is an important line you can underline. And you can underline in the sense that you can quote it while writing your answer. And this is such an easy line, and by quoting this line you can also fetch marks, because in remember in ICSE and ISC board it always happens that you fetch more marks when you quote exact lines from your text. So it seems the doctor went to the door, turned, and said, well, I won't disturb you. Glad your throat is not worrying you anymore. But he kept standing there looking at the box, intrigued by the remarkable complexity of its inside, curious to know what this strange patient of his was up to. What is it really for? He asked. You have made me inquisitive. Okay, so the doctor said, yes, sir, it seems so that you like sound a lot, because for that reason you are giving so much of time and energy, everything to this sound machine. But then the doctor went to the door, since he realized that he must leave with respect, Then, but then he said, I won't disturb you again, and even I don't want to disturb you. And I'm very happy to know that your throat is no more worrying you and it is fine now. But the doctor was also not able to convince himself to leave from that place, because he was actually interested in finding out what was happening there in that room, and what was the idea of this strange man who was his friend as well as his patient. So the doctor had become inquisitive. Inquisitive means curious. And curious is somebody who wants to know something, with a lot of anxiety, you can say, or a lot of interest. So the doctor had become kind of interested, in that. And that's why he was very curious to find out what was the actual thing going on here. Klausner looked down at the box, then at the doctor, and he reached up and began gently to scratch the lobe of his right ear. Okay, so Klausner then realized that this doctor was not, ready to leave the house unless he would get to know everything about that sound machine. So as soon as Klausner realized it, as a matter of fact, he looked at that box, then he looked at the doctor, and then he began to scratch the lobe of his right ear. And then there was a kind of a pause. The doctor was still standing by the door. He was waiting, he was smiling, and he was not able to, control his feelings, to know more and more about it. All right, I will tell you if you are interested. So Klausner had already, got to know that, and that's why Klausner said, all right, if you're so much interested in this thing, then I must tell you. There was another pause. But then Klausner was not able to understand where to begin from and what to tell and how to tell. So Klausner was taking pause again and again. And then the doctor could see that Klausner was having, trouble in this. How he should begin that topic, how he should begin to tell that how he conceived an idea and then was trying to execute it. He was shifting from one foot to the other, tugging at the lobe of his ear. So again, this is a kind of a gesture, and this gesture of his body is reflecting how anxious he was feeling, and how he was in a kind of a cumbersome or a clumsy or an unmanageable situation, where he was not able to understand how to begin the topic and how to start explaining his idea and his desire. Looking at his feet, and then at last slowly he said. So he looked down at his feet, and then he slowly began to say then, eventually, well, it's like this, he said. The theory is very simple, really. Actually, there's a very, very simple theory that has been going on in my mind, and it is all about the human ear. As I told you, that there is a normal range, of frequency that a normal human ear can hear, and beyond that frequency, it becomes inaudible to the human ears. So you know that it can't hear everything. So there is a limitation, and we know that God has given a lot of strength to the human beings, but at the same time God has also, restricted human beings by giving a lot of confinements and limitations to them. So you can, human beings cannot hear everything, and there are sounds that are so low pitched, that means infrasounds, or so high pitched, that means ultrasounds, that the human beings or human ears can never get to hear. Yes, the doctor said, yes, that's true, I know that, it's a fact. Well, speaking very roughly, any note so high that it has more than 15,000 vibrations a second, we can't hear it. Dogs have better ears than us. You can buy a whistle whose note is so high um, pitched that you can hear it at all, but a dog can hear it. Okay, so he's saying, well, I want to tell you this very roughly, that if you get any such note which is very high, and as high as you can consider it more than 15,000 vibrations a second, that means the note, you have to imagine that there is a note which has got more than 15,000 vibrations per second, and obviously that note will not be audible to a human ear. But since dogs are gifted by God with this ability, so they have better ears and they can hear even such a sound. So, you can buy such a whistle whose note is so high pitched, and then you will get to see that you won't be able to listen to that whistle. However, if you try it on a dog, you will see that the dog will be able to hear that whistle. Yes, I have seen one, the doctor said. So to that, the doctor replied that he has already seen this type of a whistle, and he has already undergone that experience. Of course, you have an up the scale higher than the note of that whistle. There is another note, a vibration if you like, but I prefer to think of it as a note. You can't hear that one either, and above that there is another and another rising right up the scale forever and ever and ever, an endless succession of notes, an infinity of notes. There is a note, if only our ears could hear it, so high that it vibrates a million times a second, and another a million times as high as that, and on higher and higher as far as numbers go, which is infinity, eternity beyond the stars. Okay, so we have to understand it here, that of course it happens, and up the scale, it is not the limit that you can have a whistle only with this 15,000 vibrations per second, but then they can go even higher than that. He's saying higher than the note of that whistle, there is another note, there is a possibility of another note as well. Okay, so here he's saying that either you can call it a note or a vibration, whatever you like, but I prefer to think of it as a note. So you can call it a note or you can call it a vibration, like 15,000 vibrations per second. So you can say that it is a note or you can say that it is a vibration. So, but I, prefer to think of it as a note. So you can't hear that high pitched whistle or this particular sound as well. Then he's saying that there is no limit, like even if you continue to go above that, there is another and another scale that goes high and high, and there are such notes that reach even to the infinity. That means endless notes are there, and so as to understand their proper numbers, so as to understand them properly, you can compare them with the numbers, just because numbers are also what, countless. You cannot count them exactly, just because they have no limit. Count in the sense you cannot limit their counting, because they are endless in number, right? Numbers are endless in numbers, so that means they are endless and they can go to any limit, and they are as many as you can say infinity, or they are beyond the stars, they are for eternity. So in the same manner the notes can go high, just because there's a scaling, like we considered here 15,000 vibrations per second. So this 15,000 vibrations was what? It was a figure. Now this figure can go as far as the numbers go. And since numbers go limitlessly, this note or the vibration can also go limitlessly. So there is no limit, and it can go to any high limit, and therefore God has limited the capability of the human ears, at least, because there is no limit to the scale of the note, vibration, or sound, and therefore God has confined the ability of the human ears. Klosner was becoming more animated every moment. He was a small, frail man, nervous and twitchy, with always moving hands, his large head inclined towards his left shoulder, as though his neck were not quite strong enough to support it rigidly. Okay, so while telling this story, while narrating this entire thing, Klosner was getting more animated, means more enthusiastic and energetic and lively, every moment. And as far as his physical appearance is concerned, he is a small and frail, means weak man. He looks kind of weak and very nervous, and his hands are like always moving. This is a gesture, this is a posture of his body. And his head is quite large, and it seems to be inclined, that means bent towards his left shoulder, as though his neck did not have enough strength to support, as if his neck were not quite strong, all right, as if his neck did not have enough strength to support his large head, and that's why the neck was failing in that job, and the large head was kind of bent towards his left shoulder. His face was smooth and pale, that means kind of nervous and yellowish, almost white, and the pale gray eyes that blinked. So his eyes were pale gray, again showing nervousness, and that blinked, you understand, that means to when your eyelids close your eyes and then you suddenly open. This is how this is called blinking, palak chapkana, and peering from behind a pair of steel spectacles. So his eyes can be seen from behind those spectacles that he continuously wear. These are steel spectacles, and these eyes, when are visible from behind those spectacles, they look bewildered, which means confused. So his eyes give the reflection of his confusion and unfocused. They look distracted, and they seem to be, you know, looking at something very remote and not in the surrounding. He was a frail, that means weak and nervous and twitchy little man. A moth of a man means he seems to be a puny or a very small man. And now, okay, dreamy and distracted. So he always looks dreamy and always distracted from his surrounding, and all of a sudden fluttering and animated. And then while talking itself, you realize that all of a sudden, or suddenly, or abruptly, he becomes energized. And now the doctor, looking at that strange pale face and those pale gray eyes, felt that somehow there was about this little person a quality of distance. All right, so the doctor could sense one thing, at least in those eyes, that there was something about this little person. He was actually short in his stature, his height was less. So we can say that he was a little person, and from his eyes it could be reflected that there was a quality of distance. That means he could foresee something, and there was immense and immeasurable distance. Immense is like large, and immeasurable something that cannot be counted, as though the mind were far away from where the body was. So when you look at that person, he seems to be lost always in his thoughts, and you always get to sense from that man as if he is not mentally present at the place where he is physically present. The doctor waited for him to go on. Klosner sighed and clasped his hands tightly together. I believe, he said, speaking more slowly now, that there is a whole world of sound about us all the time that we cannot hear. It is possible that up there in those high-pitched, inaudible regions there is a new exciting music being made, with subtle harmonies and fierce grinding discords, a music so powerful that it would drive us mad if only our ears were tuned to hear the sound of it. There may be anything, for all we know there may. So the doctor was simply waiting for him to continue to tell the story, and Klosner took a deep breath, and then he clasped his hands tightly together, and he said, I believe, he said, speaking more slowly now. Okay, so he said, I believe, and then he became more slow. And then he said that there's a word of sound. Okay, so he's saying that this is my belief that there is a word. There's a whole word altogether, and that word is of sound. And such sounds that we as human beings, being limited in our capability to hear all sorts of sounds, cannot even enjoy those sounds which are there in that word. It is possible that up there, okay, it is very much possible that in those, in that word, there must be high pitched sounds, and there must be such regions, where you will get to hear high pitched sounds, and they must be making a very new, new exciting music with beautiful and delicate harmonies is like in proper coordination, going together in a very peaceful way. And because of the pitch being very high, they must be creating such music which would be fierce, that means extremely bad, and grinding is like very deafening discourse, right? A music, okay, so such a music would be there in that word, that must be able to drive us mad, just because we do not have that ability to hear high pitched sounds. So in those regions that must be meant only for high pitched sounds, they must be creating such harmonious music which would surely be interesting. But if we as human beings get to hear them, we would surely go mad, just because we are not accustomed to those high pitched sounds. There may be anything, for all we know, there, okay, and there can be anything, like anything is possible. There's a possibility of anything, and we all know that it is something true, as a matter of fact, that there is a possibility of everything. Yes, the doctor said, but it is not very probable. Now it is very important for us to understand the difference between possible and probable. See, everything is possible in this world, that is absolutely true. But then it is not probable. Probable means there is not a likelihood of its happening. For example, let us suppose there is a student named Sam, and Sam is a very, very weak student, and he is not at all interested in studies, and he most of the time fails in most of the subjects. So it is actually possible for Sam as well to top in the class and to fetch the best marks in the class. But then it is not probable. It is possible. If he wants to do, he can surely do that and achieve that. But then it is not, likely for him to do so. That means we do not expect him to do so. There is a lesser chance, of its happening. So that is called probable. So the doctor is saying, yeah, surely everything is possible in this world, but then it is not probable. That means its likelihood, its possibility to happen is not much. Why not? Why not? Klausner pointed to a fly sitting on a small roll of copper wire on the workbench. You see that fly. What sort of a noise is that fly making now? None that one can hear. But for all we know, the creature may be whistling like mad on a very high note, or barking, or croaking, or singing a song. It has got a mouth, hasn't it? It has got a throat. All right. So Klausner is saying, why not? I mean, why do you think it is not probable? There is a likelihood of its happening too. And then Klausner pointed to a fly that was sitting on a small roll of copper wire that was lying there on that workbench. And then he said, can you see that fly? And see what sort of a noise, that fly is making now. We cannot hear that. We do not know exactly. But we are very much aware of this fact, that they may be making a whistling sound, or any such sound which must have a very high pitch or a very high note. It can be a barking or a croaking or a singing, anything. So we can simply, guess or conjecture, but we cannot exactly say what kind of a sound it is, just because we cannot hear. But it is for sure that it must be creating some sort of a sound, because it has got a mouth to do so, and also it has got a throat to do so. The doctor looked at the fly and he smiled. So the doctor really smiled, at the craziness of Klausner. And he was still standing by the door with his hand on the doorknob. Well, he said, so you are going to check upon that. So The doctor looked at the fly, and he must have thought that the poor fly is going to be a victim, of his experiment. And then he smiled, and he was still standing, at the door. So can you imagine that he was still standing at the door, and standing there itself he had conversed so much with Flossner about all that, just because he was so much interested in finding out. So his hand was still, on that doorknob, and he said, "Well, so you are gonna now check up on that fly." Some time ago, Klausner said, "I made a simple instrument that proved to me the existence of many odd, inaudible sounds. Often I have sat and watched the needle of my instrument recording the presence of sound vibrations in the air when I myself could hear nothing, and those are the sounds I wanted to listen to. I wanted to know where they come from and who or what is making them." Okay, so Klausner is saying that some time ago it has already happened that I had made a simple instrument, and that instrument turned out to be so useful for me that it had fetched me this matter as a fact that there were actually the presence of such many odd sounds which were not audible to us. Then often I sat, and I watched the needle of my instrument recording all those sound vibrations that were of such high pitch that couldn't be heard by us, but then that instrument used to record them, and I couldn't hear anything in the air, but that instrument could catch those sounds in the air, and it would record them. And those are the sounds that I am desperate to listen, and I want to know where these sounds come from and who is making them, and if not who, then what is making them. But what is the source of these sounds? I'm very much interested to know that. And that machine on the table there, the doctor said, is that going to tell you to hear these noises? So the doctor said, "All right, so this is what your intentions are, and you think that this machine which is lying there on the workbench is going to allow you to hear all those noises. It may, who knows?" So Klausner said, "Who knows? It is possible. So far, I have had no luck. But thus far, though I couldn't turn out to be successful in this experiment, but I have made some changes in it, and tonight I'm ready for another trial." So he said that he has already tried this machine, but at that point of time, the machine had turned out to be a failure. However, he has not accepted his failure, and he would try this machine again. And then he said, this machine, he said, touching it with his hands. So he touched that machine with his hands, and he said, is designed to pick up sound vibrations that are too high pitched for reception by the human ear. All right, so he told this to the doctor, that this machine was designed by him in such a manner that such sound vibrations that were of too high pitch would be received by this machine. However, such high pitched sounds cannot be heard or received by the human ear. And then this machine would also do the conversion process. This machine would convert those high pitched sounds to the scale of audible tones, and then would also make it audible to the human ears. And I tune it almost like a radio, as I just told you that he was working upon that like a person does with a radio. How do you mean? So this was the question. It isn't complicated. Say, I wish to listen to the squeak of a bat. That's a fairly high pitched sound, about 30,000 vibrations a second. So Klausner is explaining this mechanism to the doctor by saying that it's not complicated at all. For example, if you say that you want to listen to the squeak of a bat, which is actually very, very high pitched sound, and it is about 30,000 vibrations per second. So you can imagine. And he's saying that the average human ear cannot actually hear such a sound. And then he's saying, now if there were a bat flying around this room and I tuned it to 30,000 on my machine. So just imagine that you get a bat flying around your room, and then you tune this machine to 30,000 vibrations per second, and then you would be able to catch the sound which is created by the bat. I would hear the squeaking of that bat very clearly. This was the claim of Klausner to the doctor. I would even hear the correct note, F sharp or B flat or whatever it might be. So he is even claiming upon the note, and the note will be very, very clear and the correct one, but merely at a much lower pitch. So he said this machine's job is just to convert that very high pitched sound into some, lower pitch. Right? Merely means only. Don't you understand? Then he's asking whether did you understand or not. So the doctor looked at the long black coffin box, and you are going to try it tonight. So the doctor simply looked at that box and questioned to him whether he was going to try upon that machine that night itself. मतलब तुम आज की रात ही इसके ऊपर काम करोगे? Yes. Well, I wish you luck. He glanced at his watch. My goodness, he said, I must fly. Goodbye and thank you for telling me. I must call again sometime and find out what happened. The doctor went out and closed the door behind him. So he said, all right, then I wish you good luck that your machine may start working properly as per your expectations. Then he looked at his watch and said, oh my God, I'm now getting late and I must fly. That means I must just rush from here. Goodbye, thank you so much for telling me your secret, and then I will try my best to make a visit again, and then I will try to find out whether your machine worked or not. The doctor went out and closed the door behind him. For a while longer, Klosner fused about first about with the wires in the black box. Then he straightened up and, in a soft, excited whisper, said, "Now we will try again. We will take it out into the garden this time, and then perhaps the reception will be better. All right." So Klosner was like continuously busy with those wires in the black box, and when he just straightened up himself, he was talking to himself and was saying, "We will try again." So we will try again. Who is we? Like, he is now conversing with the machine, right? Itself, and saying we will try again. Or you can also assume that he is so much occupied with that task that he must be talking to his own soul and saying that we will try again. We will take it out in the garden this time so that we can make sure whether the machine is actually properly working or not. So lift it up now carefully. All right, so he just tried to lift up that machine, but while lifting that machine, he realized that it was quite heavy. He carried the box to the door, found that he couldn't open the door without putting it down, carried it back, put it on the bench, opened the door, and then carried it with some difficulty into the garden. All right. So he carried it to the door, but then he realized that he couldn't open the door while carrying that black box, and therefore he went back to the workbench, and there he put back that black box, and then again went to the door. Then he opened the door and then went back to the workbench to carry that machine again, and then he brought that machine outside into the garden. However, while carrying it, he realized it very properly that it was too heavy, and he was not able to carry it just easily. He placed the box carefully on a small wooden table that stood on the lawn. So he placed that machine carefully on a small wooden table that was standing on the lawn. He plugged the wire connections from the earphones into the machine and put the earphones over his ears. Then he returned to the shed so that he could fetch his pair of earphones, and then he came back to the garden again and he plugged the wire connections from the earphones into his machine. That means he had connected that earphone to his machine so that he could put the earphones over his ears and he could hear the sounds that would be caught by the machine while he conducts those experiments. The movements of his hands were quick and precise. Quick, you understand, and precise means very exact. So he seemed to be quite skillful or expert in that job. He was excited and breathed loudly, and breathing loudly itself is manifesting his excitement and his enthusiasm quickly through his mouth. That means he had started, breathing through his mouth, and that too very loudly, and which was very clearly portraying his excitement level. He kept on talking to himself with little words of comfort. That means he was trying to motivate himself by saying some comforting words to himself, motivating words to himself, encouraging words to himself, as though he were afraid. And this is very important. Afraid that the machine might not work, and afraid also of what might happen if it did. See, he was scared for both the repercussions. Repercussions means results or consequences or outcomes. So he was scared for both the results. And what could be the results? One result could be that the machine's mechanism would turn out to be a failure one. Or another result could be that his machine's mechanism would turn out to be a successful one. He was scared to think if the outcome of his efforts turned out to be unsuccessful. And also he was scared to think if his efforts would turn out to be successful, then what would happen? Now we have to understand it's okay. He was scared to think if the mechanism of his machine fails, what would happen? It's okay. But then why was he scared to think if the mechanism in the machine works very properly and it turns out to be successful? He was scared to think of his success because, in case he turns out to be successful, he would be able to hear all those sounds which are in general not audible to the human ears. And in that case, he would be able to feel those sounds. And he was scared to think about those odd sounds that haven't been heard by him so far ever. He stood there in the garden beside the wooden table, so pale, small, and thin that he looked like an ancient, consumptive, bespectacled child. The sun had gone down, there was no wind, no sound at all. From where he stood, he could see over a low fence into the next garden, and there was a woman walking down the garden with a flower basket on her arm. All right. So he stood there in the garden beside the wooden table he was standing. And if we look at him and figure out his physical appearance, then he is quite pale, that is yellowish and nervous, and he's very small because his height is very less and he's short stature, and he's quite thin as well. He looked like an ancient, that means kind of old. And consumptive means somebody who is suffering from such a disease which consumes the physical health of a human body. So he looks like that, as if he is not at all a healthy person. And he wears spectacles, that's why it has been said that he was bespectacled, like a child. And the sun had already gone down. There was no wind, also no sound at all. So there was no sound at all. From where he stood, he could see just over a low fence. All right. So into his garden, there was a low fencing. That means a boundary around his garden. And from there, he could see just a woman walking down the garden with a flower basket on her arm. All right. He watched her for a while without thinking about her at all. So he just continuously watched her without thinking anything about her. Then he turned to the box on the table and pressed a switch on its front. Then he simply turned to the box which was lying on that table, and then he pressed a switch on its front. He put his left hand on the volume control. This is very important for us to understand how he was working. See that he put his left hand on the volume control and his right hand was on the knob that moved a needle across a large central dial. So he put his left hand on the volume control and the right hand was on the knob, twisting which he could see a large central dial. He could see a needle in that large central dial moving like the wavelength dial of a radio. As I have already told you, it was exactly like the dials that we used to see in the radios. So there used to be needles in those dials, and when you twist the knob, then you would find the needles moving in different directions, and that's how you can say that the wavelength of the dial would be of that radio. So the dial was marked with many numbers in a series of bands starting from at 15,000 and going up to 10 lakhs. So we could see that the dial was marked with many numbers in a series of bands. So it was starting from 15,000 and it was going up to 10 lakhs. And now he was bending forward over the machine. That means again he had engaged himself with some work in that machine, and his head was cocked to one side. That means he was stuck just on one side. And because again this gesture of his body is showing that he is lost in that job which he is intently busy with at present. So his entire gesture that we see is also reflecting that he is in a tensed mood and he is trying to listen to some sort of a sound. His right hand was beginning to turn the knob. So his left hand was already on the volume control and right hand had started, turning the knob. The needle was traveling slowly across the dial. Obviously, when he was turning the knob, then the needle in that dial was also moving from one direction to another, so slowly that he could hardly see it move. All right, so he was turning or twisting that knob very very slowly, and that's why even the needle in that dial was moving very slowly. And in the earphones he could hear a faint spasmodic crackling. In the earphones, while moving that knob in the earphones, he could hear a faint, that means a very dim, a very low, and spasmodic is something which is created at different intervals. Crackling is a kind of a sound, so it was a spasmodic crackling sound. Behind this crackling sound, he could hear a distant humming tone, which was the noise of the machine itself, but that was all. As he listened, he became conscious of a curious sensation, a feeling that his ears were stretching out away from his head, that each ear was connected to his head by a thin, stiff wire like a tentacle, and that the wires were lengthening, that the ears were going up and up toward a secret and forbidden territory, a dangerous ultrasonic region where ears had never been before and had no right to be. Okay, so behind this crackling sound, he could hear, see, he could hear a crackling sound, but then in the background of that crackling sound, he could also hear a distant sound. That means a sound, something, coming from a distance, and it was like a humming tone, and it seemed to be the noise of the machine itself. That's all. Like it used to happen in the radios also at times, that instead of any kind of a channel sound, you would get to hear the sound of the radio itself, some sort of a humming sound or kuch gargadahat si. So as he listened, he became conscious of a curious sensation. So while listening, it happened that he became conscious of a curious sensation. Curious sensation is like a different kind of a feeling that was making him inquisitive or curious to know more and more. A feeling that his ears were stretching, all right, and his ears seemed to be stretching away from his head. ऐसा लग रहा था जैसे उनके कानों को कोई सर से अलग कर रहा हो, उनके हेड और उनके कानों के बीच में एक डिस्टेंस आता जा रहा है, और ऐसा लग रहा है कि जो उनके कान हैं वो अब सर से, उनके हेड से, his ears were associated or attached with his head only through a very thin and stiff wire like a tentacle. So tentacle is the thin legs, of the worms and the insects, you must have seen. So those thin stiff wires were like the tentacle. It is a figure of speech called simile. A comparison has been made to tell you that as those creatures have got thin legs, to walk upon, in the same manner they appeared, or there was a sensation to Klausner as if his ears had got had been continuously detaching from his head, and अब ईयर और हेड के बीच में जो अटैचमेंट है वो डायरेक्ट अटैचमेंट नहीं है, वो सिर्फ पतले पतले तार जैसे, टेंटैकल्स जैसे वो वायर्स हैं, बस उन्हीं से कान और हेड के बीच में, ईयर्स और हेड के बीच में एक अटैचमेंट बचा हुआ है. एंड द वायर्स वर लेंथनिंग. अच्छा, और उन वायर्स की लेंथ बढ़ती ही जा रही है, बढ़ती ही जा रही है. इसका मतलब कि लेंथ बढ़ेगी वायर्स की. तो यू कैन कोरिलेट इट इन दिस मैनर, लाइक यू मस्ट हैव सीन च्युइंग गम्स. सो व्हेन यू च्यू इट, not chew it exactly, you will do it later on, but before that when you try to like stretch it, so you can easily stretch it and you will see कि वो जितना भी आप चाहो लंबा उसको खींचते चले जाओ और एक पतला सा तार बनता जाएगा और उतना ही ज़्यादा दोनों एंड्स में डिस्टेंस आता जाएगा. इन द सेम मैनर ऐसा लग रहा है जैसे ईयर्स और हेड के बीच में एक लंबा डिस्टेंस क्रिएट होता जा रहा है, और अब जो उनके बीच में एक वायर है वो एलोंगेट होता जा रहा है, वो बढ़ता जा रहा है, लंबा होता जा रहा है, बिल्कुल च्युइंगम की तरह. जितना आप उसको खींचो वो लंबा होता जाता है और दोनों एंड्स के बीच में डिस्टेंस बढ़ता जाता है. उसी तरह हेड और ईयर के बीच में डिस्टेंस बढ़ता जा रहा है. और यहाँ पर ये हॉरिजॉन्टल डायरेक्शन में नहीं हो रहा है, ऐसा लग रहा है वर्टिकली ईयर्स जो है वो ऊपर जा रहे हैं, किसी ऐसी टेरिटरी में, ऐसे रीजन में जहाँ पर जाना मना है, जो सीक्रेटिव मिस्टीरियस प्लेस है, बहुत ही डेंजरस है, अल्ट्रासोनिक रीजन है, जहाँ पर अल्ट्रा साउंड्स सुनाई देंगे, दैट मीन्स बहुत हाई पिच्ड के साउंड्स, जहाँ पर ऐसा लग रहा है कि उसके ईयर्स ना तो कभी पहले गए हैं, ना ही उन्हें वहाँ पर जाने का हक है. The little needle crept slowly across the dial, and suddenly he heard a shriek, a frightful, piercing shriek, and he jumped and dropped his hands, catching hold of the edge of the table. He stared around him as if expecting to see the person who had shrieked. There was no one inside except the woman in the garden next door, and it was certainly not she. She was bending down, cutting yellow roses and putting them in her basket. All right. तो वो जो लिटिल नीडल है डायल के अंदर, क्रीप जो है, क्रीप का पास्ट टेंस होता है क्रेप्ट एंड इट मीन्स मूव वेरी स्लोली. तो वो धीरे धीरे मूव कर रही है और अचानक से उनको एक श्रीकिंग साउंड सुनाई दिया. दैट वॉज अ स्क्रीम, वेरी हाई पिच स्क्रीमिंग. बहुत ही फियरफुल था और पियर्सिंग श्रीक थी. पियर्सिंग का मतलब है डेफनिंग, कानों को बहरा कर देने वाली. ऐसी वो चिल्लाहट थी. एंड ही जस्ट जम्प्ड एंड ड्रॉप्ड हिज हैंड्स. And when he got to hear such a deafening sound, he couldn't tolerate that, and he just jumped and he dropped his hands. His hands came down, and he just tried to catch the edge of the table so that he could take the support of that table to stand there. And he just stared around himself in his surroundings so as to find out that origin of the sound. And he was expecting to see some person there, but he did not find anybody who must have shrieked or caused that shrieking sound. But then there was just one person inside or in that surrounding, and that one person whom he found in the surrounding was a woman in the garden, in his neighboring house. And he was very much sure, Klausner was very, very sure about it, that this lady was not the one who had caused that deafening shriek. She was just bending down and cutting yellow roses and putting them in her basket. That was the only thing she was occupied with. Again it came, a throatless, inhuman shriek, sharp and short, very clear and cold. All right. So while that lady, whose name is later on you'll get to see, she is Mrs. Saunders, his neighbor. So while she was cutting those yellow roses, yes. So again it happened that the same, throatless, inhuman shriek occurred. Now throatless means such a sound which seemed to be coming out of such an object that had no throat. And it seemed to be coming out of such a creature on an object that was not a human being for sure. So the origin of the shrieking sound was not a human being, was not a creature that had got a throat like a human being, but the sound was very sharp and short and very clear and very cold. Cold means emotionless here. It's not thanda wala cold, it's emotionless. The note itself possessed a minor metallic quality. That note itself, had some sort of a metallic quality, as if it had been caused by some metal, falling down or something like that, which Klausner had never heard before. He could just correlate with the metal falling down, but it was not exactly that, because it was something intolerable and such a sound which Klausner was not at all familiar with. Klausner looked around him and searching instinctively for the source of the noise. So Klausner was simply looking around himself and was trying to find out the source of that sound. In the meantime, the woman next door was the only living thing. All right, so what he could find out as a result in his surrounding was that only Mrs. Saunders, who was standing there, and who was the only human being in that surrounding at that point of time. He saw her reach down, take a rose stem in the fingers of one hand, and snip the stem with a pair of scissors. All right, so he noticed her doing this, that he saw her. She was actually trying to cut those roses. She would take a rose stem in the fingers of her one hand, and with the all right, and snip, that means cut the stem with a pair of scissors. So this is how she was cutting down the flowers. Again he heard the scream. So she was cutting those flowers and keeping them in her basket, and while she repeated that process, the same shrieking or screaming sound was heard by Klausner. It came at the exact moment when the rose stem was cut. So this was again a kind of a coincidence, or what, maybe it is so far mysterious. At this point the woman straightened up, put the scissors in the basket with the roses, and turned to walk away. So, what was noticed by Klausner was that the sound coming and this woman's snipping the stem of the rose was exactly the same. So the time, that time was same when the sound used to come and then this woman's snipping. So he correlated these two things, that at the same time, when that woman would just cut the flowers, at the same time the shrieking sound would occur. It means that shrieking sound had something to do with the snipping of those stems of the roses and all. So again he heard the scream, and it came. All right, this was done. At this point the woman straightened up. Then woman had already done her job, so she just straightened up, and then she put her scissors back in the basket with those roses, and then she turned away. She turned to just walk away to her house. So Mrs. Saunders is the name of that lady, as I told you. Klausner shouted. So Klausner shouted and called her out, his voice shrill with excitement, and he was quite excited while calling out this lady. Oh, Mrs. Saunders, this is what he said to her. And looking round, the woman saw her neighbor standing on his lawn, a fantastic arm-waving little person with a pair of earphones on his head, calling to her in a voice so high and loud that she became alarmed. So she looked around. The woman saw. All right, she looked around, and then she saw that her neighbor was standing on a lawn, and he was quite, he looked quite fantastic, and he was just waving his arm, and he was a little person, as we know that his height was not very good, and he had got the pair of earphones on his head, and he was calling her in such a high, loud voice. And when she looked at him, and she got alarmed, she was like alert, and she uh, got kind of scared too, because she thought, what is this way to call me, and just for no reason. Cut another one, please cut another one quickly. So this was the command given by Klausner, or a request, you can say, made by Klausner to Mrs. Saunders, that she should cut one more flower. She stood still, staring at him. First, though, she didn't react at all, and she was just standing and staring at him, whether he had gone mad or something. Why, Mr. Klausner, she said, what's the matter? She said, why? What's the matter? Why do you want me to do it again? I would do when I wanted. Why should I do it just because you are asking me to do so? Please do as I ask, he said, cut just one more rose. So Klausner again made a request to Mrs. Saunders to cut one more rose, just because he wanted to check and wanted to ensure whether the sound was actually coming at the very instant when the flower was being cut. Mrs. Saunders had always believed her neighbor to be a rather peculiar person. So, Mrs. Saunders always knew that he was a kind of a strange person. Peculiar means a strange person, and now it seemed that he had gone completely crazy. So she realized that probably this was the time he had gone completely crazy, and she wondered, means she thought whether she should run. Okay, so she first thought whether she should run back into her house and bring her husband outside to deal with this man. Then she thought, no, it's okay. He seems to be harmless. I'll just humor him. All right, if he wants me to entertain him with that piece of work, then all right, I will entertain him. Certainly, Mr. Klausner, if you like. She said, surely, if you want me to do that, I can do that for you, she said. And then she took her scissors from the basket and bent down, and she cut another rose. Again, Klausner heard that frightful throatless shriek in the earphones. Again, it came at the exact moment the rose stem was cut. So, fortunately or unfortunately, what I should say, but it happened as per the expectation of Klausner. Again, that frightful and throatless screaming was heard by Klausner in his earphones, and that too at the very exact moment when the rose stem was cut by Mrs. Saunders. He took off the earphones and ran to the fence that separated the two gardens. All right, he said, that's enough, no more, please, no more. So he just took off his earphones then, and he just ran to that fence that was separating the two gardens. And then he said, all right, no more, that's enough. I do not want you to cut any more flower anymore, just because I do not want to hurt them. He wants to say, which he would probably say later on. The woman stood there, a yellow rose in one hand, clippers in the other, looking at him. So the woman was like confused and bewildered to find this man going crazy and talking so whimsically. She was not able to understand, what to do and how to deal with him. She was just standing there. In one of her hands she had got yellow rose, and in another of her hands, she had got clippers, with the help of which she was cutting those flowers. So she was just looking at him in that posture. I am going to tell you something, Mrs. Saunders, he said. तो he said, I will tell you something that you won't believe, कुछ ऐसा जिस पे आपको यकीन नहीं आएगा. He put his hands on top of the fence and peered at her intently through his thick spectacles. तो उन्होंने अब अपना हाथ रखा फेंस के टॉप पर और उसके बाद देखा बहुत ही पर्पसफुली और इंटेंटली उनकी तरफ अपने थिक ग्लासेस से. और जब देखा तो she got more scared. You have this evening cut a basket full of roses. आज तो आपने बहुत सारे roses तोड़े हैं. You have with a sharp pair of scissors cut through the stems of living things. क्या आपको इस बात का रियलाइजेशन है कि आपने एक जीते जागते पेड़ों को हर्ट किया है, प्लांट्स को हर्ट किया है, आपने रोजेस को तोड़ा है जो कि लिविंग थिंग्स हैं. Each rose that you cut screamed in the most terrible way. And when you were cutting them, you were hurting them so badly that they used to cause, a screaming or a shrieking sound. Did you know that, Mrs. Saunders? क्या आपको ये बात पता थी? No, she said, I certainly did not know that. She said, not at all. I surely did not know about that. It happens to be true, he said. He was breathing rather rapidly, but he was trying to control his excitement. He said it is absolutely true, and he was getting under this impression that his plan and the mission and then his execution of that device had turned out to be successful. This is what he had begun to conclude. And he was breathing very rapidly, that means very quickly, and which was an indication that he was very, very excited with this impression that his execution of the device had turned out to be successful, and that the mechanism which he had thought of was actually successfully working. I heard them shrieking. He said कि हमने तो चिल्लाते सुना है उन्हें. Each time you cut one, I heard the cry of pain. जितनी बार आपने उन फ्लावर्स को कट किया, हमने उनके दर्द की आवाज को सुना है. A very high-pitched sound, approximately 132,000 vibrations a second. बहुत high pitch का sound था. Approximately आप कह सकते हो 132,000 vibrations per second. जाहिर है आप कैसे सुन पाएंगी, but I heard it with the help of my machine. He wanted to appreciate himself and brag about himself, but then Mrs. Saunders would not give him that opportunity. Did you really, Mr. Klausner? She decided she would make a dash for the house in about 5 seconds. So she just put forth this question to Mr. Klausner कि क्या आपने वाकई सुना? And then she utilized that time while he could answer her. She took up the opportunity and she thought that she would just run back into her house in about 5 seconds. You might say, he went on, that a rose bush has no nervous system to feel with, no throat to cry with. You would be right. It hasn't, not like ours. Anyway, but how do you know, Mrs. Saunders? And here he leaned far over the fence and spoke in a fierce whisper. How do you know that a rose bush doesn't feel as much pain when someone cuts its stem in two as you would feel if someone cut your wrist off with a garden shears? How do you know that it's alive, isn't it? So he's saying, you might say, he went on, means he continued, that a rose bush means the plants of rose, have no nervous system. You may say so, that there is no nervous system in the body of the plants of rose. There is no throat as well in their bodies with the help of which they can cry. But, and you would be right in saying all these things, but still, they have created a shrieking sound just because they must have the nervous system as well as the throat. Yeah, that's true. They do not have them like ours. Like we have got the nervous system, they do not have a nervous system. We have got a throat to cry with, they do not have a throat. But then God must have bestowed some other parts in place of nervous system and in place of throat. God must have bestowed upon them some other phenomena or mechanism with the help of which they can cause even shrieking sound. So they are living creatures, they are living things, they can feel the pain, and they must have got some substitute of the nervous system as well as the throat in them. And how do you know, Mrs. Saunders? While conversing, he went even ahead towards that fence and he bent over that even more. And then he spoke in a fierce whisper, that means in a sharp whisper. How do you know that a rose bush would not be feeling as much pain when someone cuts its stem? You tell me, would you not feel pain if someone would cut your wrist with those same clippers or garden shears? You tell me, how do you know that? Because we all know it very well that the plants are living things. What do you say about it? Yes, Mr. Klossner. Oh, yes, and good night. She said, yes, you're right, and good night. Quickly, she turned and ran up the garden to her house. She just took up that opportunity and ran back to her house. Klossner went back to the table and he put on the earphones. So Klossner went back to his table and he put on his earphones and stood for a while listening. So he was standing and for a while he was just listening. He could still hear the faint crackling sound and humming noise of the machine. So he couldn't hear that shrieking sound, but he could still hear the same, dim and crackling sound and that humming sound, which seemed to be the sound of the machine itself, but nothing more. So he bent down and he wanted to do this experiment again so as to, get assured one more time. And he took hold of a small white daisy, which is a kind of a flower which was growing on the lawn of Klossner. So he just took it between and thumb and forefinger, that means like this. He took it and slowly pulled it upward, means he was trying to uproot it, and sideways. So first he tried to uproot it up to, in the upward direction, and then sideways like this. And this is what he continued to do until the stem got broken. And as soon as it got broken, from the moment that he started pulling to the moment when the stem broke, he distinctly heard in the earphones, all right. From the moment he had started, shaking that or trying to uproot that flower, and then till that stem all exactly broke, he heard clearly, he clearly heard some sound in his earphones. And what kind of a sound were they? A faint means a dim, high-pitched cry, and curiously inanimate. It was a dim, high-pitched cry, and it was inquisitively or curiously inanimate means something which was not lively, something which seemed to be uh, not relevant with human beings or any living thing. He took another daisy, then he took another flower and did the same process. Once more he heard the cry, but was not so sure now that it expressed pain. So when he repeated the same experiment, he came to this conclusion that the conclusion that he had derived earlier, that it was a cry of pain of the flowers, was not right at all, because this time the sound that he could hear seemed to be the sound different from that. This sound seemed to be where, all right, okay, this sound did not seem to be the sound that was expressing pain. Then he came to this conclusion, it was not pain. It was neither pain nor surprise. Then what was it? It didn't really express any of the feelings or emotions known to a human being. So thus far he had come to this conclusion that the sound that he could hear was in no way related with the human beings. And this time he has come to this conclusion that the sound was not even expressing a cry of pain, but the sound was expressing such a feeling, such an emotion, which was in no way related to a human being. That means it was never experienced by a human being. Such an emotion was probably being expressed by that sound. It was just a cry. You can say it was just a cry. It was not at all, carrying any kind of an emotion, but it was just a cry, neutral one. A stony cry means very hard and it had no emotion at all. It was a single emotionless note, and it was expressing nothing at all. It had been same with the roses. So he came to this conclusion that it was not only with the daisy but also with the roses that he had heard. So he had heard the same sound when the rose stem was being cut, and this time when he was trying to uproot the daisy, he could hear the same sound, and these sounds were not at all expressing any emotion which was known to a human being. They were emotionless sounds. Then he's saying it had been the same with the roses. He had been wrong in calling it a cry of pain. That means he was wrong, whatever he told to Mrs. Saunders, that it was a cry of pain or something like that. A flower probably did not feel the pain. So he came to this conclusion that probably It was his just mistaken misunderstanding, and the truth is that the flowers do not feel any kind of a pain at all. It felt something else which we did not know about, something called twine or spur or plinacment or anything you like. Then he said it felt something else, something that we do not know about, something that we are not aware of. So we cannot even call it with the words which we have in our vocab, but we should be giving it a new different word like twine or spur or plinacment. That means these are those words that have no meaning and that are not there in the dictionary literally to give you any proper meaning, but then these words are his own creations, because he wants to say that the kind of a sound that was heard by him could not be described or articulated in the words that are present in the dictionary. So when he has to express or explain these sounds, then he has to discover, or you can say altogether invent some new words, right? So that's why he is using such words which are not there in the dictionary to express or explain these sounds, just because the sounds are not at all known to the human beings. So the words should be such as well, which are not known to the human beings and which are not there in the dictionary. So he's saying that these sounds should be described with the words like a spurl or plinacment or something like that, whichever you like. You can have a word of your own to express or explain that sound. And I think first part of this story I should wrap up here, and in another other video lectures I will try to complete this story. And I hope you have understood this story, and thank you so much for watching.